Hello, I'm John Bowen. This talk is about anti-anxiety puppy training, how to raise a confident puppy. So the first thing to talk about is know your puppy. People have a general expectation that all puppies are going to learn quickly and they're going to follow training and they're not going to make any mistakes. But unfortunately, puppies are all different and their temperaments are different, their personalities are different, and that means that we need to adapt our training methods to take into account the differences in personality that we see in puppies, what motivates them, what makes them anxious, what makes them want to do the things that we want them to do, and how they learn. So there are a number of things that we should talk about. Firstly, what motivates your puppy? What makes your puppy want to do the things that you want your puppy to do? Next, what does it look like when your puppy's stressed? So if you're at a busy training class and it looks like your puppy isn't really responding very well, is there a reason for that? And once you know what stress looks like, it becomes easier to identify and say, actually, this is overwhelming. My puppy can't cope with it. I need to give my puppy a bit of a break and maybe try doing training later on or somewhere which is quieter. Then something which I think is very important that people really don't understand, which is excitability. So how excitable your puppy is makes a big difference to how you do training and how your puppy's likely to respond. And once you understand what you're looking for, it becomes easier then to adapt your training to make sure that your puppy's going to respond. And then lastly, just 2 or 3 points on how puppies communicate. Common things that puppies do that some people don't understand that make a big difference to how you're going to interact with your puppy to make sure that you don't do the wrong thing and misinterpret what they're trying to say to you. So if we look at what motivates puppies, we know that treats motivate puppies, we know that praise motivates puppies, we know that play motivates puppies. Now we can't always use play as a reward when we're doing training, but there are times when we can. If we're playing a game which is, say, throw fetch, when we throw the ball and the puppy brings it back, we can ask them to sit so that we then throw the ball again, and that's using play as a way of reinforcing. And so once we understand what it is that really works for that puppy, is it treats they like, or maybe they're not really interested in treats. It might be a border collie who's much more motivated by play, or a dog who's much more motivated by praise. Then we can use exactly what it is that the puppy wants as a reward. And often we want to mix these things together, so some praise and some treats, or some play and some treats. And that way we're making sure that we're keying into the things that the puppy wants to have in order to get them to perform the behaviours we want them to. Then the next thing is stress. On the slide there's a list of common stress indicators, things like having a tucked tail, trembling, all the way down the list to paw lifting and drooling. And this is a long list of over 20 indicators of stress in puppies and adult dogs. Unfortunately, most owners know less than half of those signs. So we did a study last year looking at this, and we found that most owners didn't know half of those signs, which is worrying, because it means that effectively in many situations when the puppy is stressed, we're blinded to it. We don't even know that this is a stressed animal. And I've listed some of the percentages there just to give you an idea of what proportion of people recognise these things. So at the top of the list, about 94% of people recognise that a dog with its tail underneath itself, a tucked tail, is a stressed dog. But right down at the bottom, only 27% of people recognise that paw lifting is an indicator of stress, and that's actually a very common stress indicator. So low-level stress is often indicated by paw lifting, nose licking or lip licking, and yawning. And if we look at all of those 3 things, for each of them, less than 50% of people recognised that those were stress signs. If we see those signs, these are indicators that we should stop training and move to somewhere where the puppy can settle down, somewhere quiet and calm, where the puppy can settle down and relax, and then either abandon training or go back to training again once the puppy's overcome its level of stress. And I'm going to show you some common indicators of anxiety grouped together so that you can try to remember them when you see these. The first one is we see physical signs of anxiety, which are things like increased heart rate, panting, or breathing very quickly. Also dilated pupils, so we see the black area at the centre of the dog's eye is very expanded. That's an indication that its adrenaline levels are very high and it's in a state of stress. Then we can see things like trembling, being unsettled, so finding it difficult sitting down or resting. So this might be at the training class that when the dog's not doing any training, it's pacing and wandering and can't lie down. Or when you try to offer it a food treat, it won't take the treat. So owners will say, if I'm at home, he does training for treats, he's very, very good. When we go to the training class, or if we're out in a busy shopping area, the dog won't take food. That's an indication of anxiety, exactly the same as we would experience. Then these low-level kind of indicators that I mentioned, so yawning, if the dog's not tired and lying on the floor ready to have a nap, if it's yawning, that could be an indicator of stress. Lip licking is an indicator of stress. And these low-level kind of whining and crying noises when dogs are unsettled, those are also indicators of stress. Then two things which relate to training. And this might seem a bit of an odd combination of things, but we see when dogs are anxious, they're more vigilant. So they find it very hard to focus on one thing, and they keep scanning around the environment, looking around to see what's going on around them. That can be excitement, but it can also be an indicator of anxiety. And then the other thing that we see is pessimism. That might seem like a very strange thing to talk about, but when dogs are anxious, they tend to see the worst in what's going on. So if there's a sudden noise or movement, if the dog's in a positive state of mind, is happy, it might see that as something fun and look excited. If the same thing happens when the dog's anxious, it might be startled and look anxious and maybe try to hide. So how you feel if you're anxious tends to make you think that what's going on around you is bad rather than good. Now, if you imagine that you're trying to do training which is all about being good and feeling good and getting treats, if you can't eat, you can't focus, and everything new that's happening around you, you see as something potentially bad, then that's building anxiety and it's taking away confidence. So the next thing is how excitable your puppy is. Excitable puppies are more likely to react to different situations and events. So if there's a knock at the door, they get very, very excited. Or if there are children running around in the park, they get very, very excited. Some of them, even when you offer them a really, really delicious food treat, they get so excited they can't focus on anything else. They can't sit down, they jump up, they want the treat. So these are puppies who the excitement of what's happening overwhelms their ability to focus and concentrate. And once puppies are excited, it's very, very difficult for them to do training. So we need to think about, is my puppy an excitable puppy or is it a more calm puppy? And adapt the kind of training based on that. So if we've got a very calm puppy, we might need a bit more enthusiasm and encouragement. We might need to be more active to get the puppy excited enough to want to do something. Otherwise it just sits there and doesn't do anything. So we might need encouragement. On the other hand, if we've got a very excitable puppy, we might need to be very calm. Keep the instructions calm. Maybe use food treats, but not the really, really delicious ones that get the dog really excited, something which is a bit more ordinary like kibble. And we might want to do that training in a very calm environment with no distraction, so it's easy for the puppy to focus on what we're doing. So thinking about communication, there are two or three things which I think are really important pieces of communication that people often don't spot. One is the play bow. So you can see in the picture, this is a puppy who has gone down on his front feet, on his front legs, and his bum's sticking up in the air and his legs at the back are straight, and he'll be wiggling around. That's a play bow. And what it indicates is that everything else the puppy is going to do is about play, even growling or biting. So if that puppy bites you or grabs your clothes and shakes at them, that's still a playful thing. And the puppy will do that and then do another play bow. And what he's trying to communicate with you is, even though this is quite rough and I'm biting you and I'm grabbing your clothes, this is playful. So we've got to be very careful not to overreact. This would be a bit like if you're playing a board game with somebody and all of a sudden they erupt into a state of fury and kick the board over. You think, this is really, they don't understand this is just a game. We're not really playing for money. This is just fun. So the same thing, if a puppy's biting you and it's doing a play bow, or doing play bows, then if we react really angrily to that, we're actually showing that we don't even understand what play means. So that's very, very confusing for a puppy. The next one is generally puppy biting, play biting. So puppies don't have hands, so they use their mouths to investigate everything. So they're going to bite your fingers, they're going to investigate your clothes and your shoes and objects. This is normal. They use their mouths like hands. And it's okay to say, ow, I don't want you to do that, and to withdraw attention. But just don't get angry about it, because if you do, again, they're not going to understand. And then the last one is when puppies roll onto their back and show their belly. Most people think that that's asking for a tummy tickle, but in dog language, that can be an indication that the puppy is nervous and submissive and wants you to disengage. Now, you might find that this isn't something you ever see directed at you, but you might see that this is what your puppy does when he or she meets unfamiliar people, that when they go to stroke him, he rolls onto his back. that's not an invitation for a tummy tickle necessarily. That may be a puppy who feels overwhelmed and submissive, and because it's lying on its back, you can't see many of the other stress indicators. So you can't see the tail movements, you can't see all of the other body position indicators because the puppy's on its back. So generally the best answer is, if puppies roll on their back, don't stroke them, leave them alone, because then you're never going to make the mistake of trying to touch them when they're in an anxious or submissive state. And do the same with unfamiliar people. If the puppy rolls onto its back, just get them to stand there and talk and wait for the puppy to get up again, because that's much less likely to be misunderstood. So now I'm just going to finish off with some of the main tips that I would give people. So the first one is stay calm. So we've got to remember that puppies are learning a completely new language. They're learning the things that we're saying to them, our body language, our tone of voice. And you've got to think this is an animal who's learning a second language. How many of us know a second language well? Most of us don't. We know our language. We might have a few words in another language, but we don't really understand it as well as our own. Well, this is a puppy trying to learn human body language and human speech. So we've got to be very patient. Very often puppies are going to make mistakes during the first few days after they've moved into the home. They're going to urinate on the floor. They're going to grab something and chew it. If we get angry and we're cross with them and we're raising our voice, don't forget this puppy's never seen you before. This is the first few days of that relationship. And if that relationship starts out with somebody becoming angry and confrontation, or even just raising their voice, for many puppies that's really difficult to cope with, and that's going to change the way that that relationship develops, and it's not going to be a trusting relationship. We know from studies that a very large proportion of adult dogs find raised voices stressful, and puppies it's even more true. This may be, if the puppy's been reared in a kennel, some of the things you're saying and doing are the first time that puppy's ever seen those things. So if the first voices they're hearing are raised voices, this is not a good way to train a dog to understand voice communication, because it's stressful. So if we do need to repeat commands when we're doing training, just use the same tone of voice. Don't raise your voice. Don't get cross if the puppy's not doing what you want. It may be that you've missed something, the puppy's stressed, excited, distracted, just not in the right mood. So if it's not in the right mood, repeat the commands, and if you feel like things are not going anywhere, give up. Next thing is how often and how much training. So people tend to want to do long training sessions because it fits in with our lifestyle. You know, I'm going to do an hour on Saturday morning. Well, every single day from 8 or 9 weeks of age when you get your puppy, that your puppy is learning more and more information. And they're learning very quickly, but they don't have a lot of concentration. So you need to make sure that these training sessions are maximum of a few minutes long, maybe 5 minutes, several times a day. And what's happening then is the puppy does maybe 5 minutes of training and sleeps. And when they sleep, that's when long-term memory is formed. So they're programming what you've trained them into long-term memory. So when they wake up, they've learned something. So 5-minute training sessions during a day, well within the puppy's capability. It's going to be fresh, able to concentrate, and when it sleeps, it's going to consolidate that. Whereas if you do all of that training in one long session, it's not going to work as well. It's going to push the puppy beyond its limits. Then the other thing is try to do training in lots of different situations, at home, in the garden, on walks, because a lot of training can become linked to the situation it's done in. So if you think of, if you've ever had a dog before, dogs that have learned to sit at the side of the road when you're about to cross the road against traffic, they've learned that because you've repeated it so many times that they've learned that when you stand by a road, they should just sit down. So this is what we call context specificity. The dog's learned that this behavior should be done in this situation. So unfortunately, that means that if we do all of our training in one place, let's say we do all of our training at the training classes, maybe that training won't extend into other situations. If we do it lots of different places, it will do. And then choosing the right time and place to do training. So the initial training of any command that we want the dog to learn should be done in a calm, quiet place with minimal distractions. And then once we feel that the puppy's understanding what we want them to do, then we can move on to busier, more distracting places later. So we're starting off in the same way as if you were trying to learn another language. You want to sit down with somebody and for them to explain it to you, maybe go through some examples with you somewhere where you can focus, not in a busy cafe or in the middle of a shopping area. You want somewhere where you can think and concentrate, and that's exactly the same with puppies. The next thing is making training part of daily life. So rather than just doing training in sessions, doing things like always make your puppy sit before it can go through the door, before you put the lead on, before you cross the road, practicing getting the puppy to get on and off the sofa, to go through doors on command. These are things that you can do all day, every time you interact with the puppy, you can get them to do something on command. That means that training is part of daily life. And rather than the puppy learning, well, I do these commands when you tell me, when we're at training and you've got a bag full of food in your hand, the puppy's learning, I do this all the time. Wherever we are, whatever we're doing, I follow these commands and they become part of my normal daily life. And if you do that, then very often dogs learn to do these things without you even realizing it, that they've learned to sit at the curb or wait before you go through the door or get off the sofa when you come to sit down. So you don't even have to say anything anymore, they've learned it. And it's very important to do activities in general that increase mental and physical stimulation. So going to active training classes and doing things which are fun for the dog, not just about training, but doing things together. Doing activities that involve a level of cooperation. So it's not just telling the dog what to do, it's the dog looking at you as somebody who is a source of guidance. So when they're not sure what to do, they look at you and they think, well, you're going to tell me what to do. So humans and dogs act as a combination together. Dogs don't function very well on their own. They function really well when we're there to show them what to do. And that can even involve things like puzzle training. So we have puzzles that the dog can solve to get food. Rather than just letting the dog solve it on its own, why not play that game with the puppy? Show them how to find the food, and then you're working together toward an objective. And these are very subtle things, but it means that the puppy's looking at you as somebody to help them solve problems rather than somebody who's just there. And one of the things we see a lot of issues with is heel training. And I'm a believer in cheating in some areas, and we can go and do training classes that do heel training, but one of the best ways is just to use a nose halter. So this is a halter that goes over the nose. It makes it harder for the dog to pull. And usually we find if we would use those consistently for a period of a few weeks or months, most dogs will learn to walk to heel very easily and they don't need the halter anymore. So rather than spend a lot of time on training one thing, which can be very, very difficult with an excitable puppy, better to cheat and use all of that time that you would spend on heel training on other things that are more important for the puppy to learn. So to conclude, my top tips would be try to understand your pup, understand emotional state, motivation, signs of stress. Put as much time as you can into training during those first few months because that will pay dividends later on. It's going to be tough. I'm looking to getting a puppy myself at some point, and I know it's going to be very tough 6 to 12 months. But if you put that training in at the beginning, then things are much easier later on. Most important thing is don't put the puppy under too much pressure. Stop when you think that the puppy's tired or stressed or things are getting overwhelming and just think, well, we'll try again later on. You don't have to keep going. Wherever possible, use reward-based methods. So don't use punishment as much as you can. Try to stick to reward-based methods. People lose their tempers. We have to understand that we get upset and we raise our voices occasionally. We shouldn't be crucifying ourselves over it. But on the other hand, that we should think, I shouldn't do that. I need to focus on doing things that show the dog what I want him to do rather than trying to stop him from doing things that I don't want him to do. And that's really my last point, is to say, be patient. This is a young animal trying to learn a second language in a completely new and unfamiliar environment. The most important thing is just to give them plenty of time and space and not put them under too much pressure. So thanks for listening.